Bismillah wa salatu wa salam wa rasulullah wa ba'd. In the name of Allah, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon his last and final messenger. As to what follows, family, friends, foes, haters, and hateettes, welcome back to the Feachaz. I greet you all in peace and love with no hatred in my heart. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before we begin, as usual, please like, please subscribe, and please share. As you know, we got a lot of haters up in here. And on this weekend, we have invited to the Feachaz three heavyweights in the Dawah scene. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. And I'm incredibly honored to have these guests on the channel. Alhamdulillah. And I will allow everybody to introduce themselves. We'll start with Shaykh Ukkasha, our Shaykh Ukkasha, Muhammad. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Go ahead. Give us some salam.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa sallam taslima kathira. Amma ba'd. Wa Salaam Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me on the show with these esteemed friends and brothers and, as we say, contemporaries of mine, along with you. And my prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, makes it something beneficial, impactable, and sincerely for the benefit of the people and his way. I mean, basically, I'm a convert Muslim, or if you like, revert. They're one and the same, from the same approach Islamically. And I accepted Islam in 1989 in Newark, New Jersey, after leaving St. Louis, Missouri, as we call the Loop. And I'm the middle child of 5. And I was born premature, 6 months. And because of that, my vision was always bad. I remember as a child being on the ground crawling, maybe like 1 year old. And they said, I was looking at a penny, and they said, why that boy looking at that penny like that? They took me to the doctor, and the doctor gave me glasses as 1 year old. I had glasses, like they say, thick like ice cubes, or as we used to say back in Jahiliyyah, the bottom of the Coke bottle.
Yeah.
So, alhamdulillah, at 16, Allah tested me with losing my right eye. I got punched in the right eye, like the old Tommy Hearn, Sugar Ray Leonard fight, where he kept getting punched in the eye, and it caused retinal detachment. So basically from 16 until 5 years ago, when I lost all of the vision in both eyes due to retinal detachment and glaucoma, I grew up with one eye. So going to the East Coast from St. Louis was a big challenge. I accepted Islam in 89 in Newark. And from there, I started to learn under the likes of Imam Hisham Jabbar, rahimahullah ta'ala, on Chancellor Avenue at a place called Beit al-Khaliq. And then from there, I started to learn with Sheikh Ahmed Salam, who was an Egyptian teacher at Bradford Place, and the Qadi, Anis Khalid, who was a African Qadi. And I learned with them, and then I transitioned from there to East Orange with Dawud Adib, Abu Muslima. Then by 87, I went to Egypt. 87, 88, 97, Egypt, after Hajj in 95. And then from 97 through 2010, I was between Yemen and Egypt in 1 year in Saudi Arabia. And so now I am actively in many communities, primarily a mixed community, which originally it's a African American community, but we have different diversities from all of the different lands and cultures and languages. And I'm the head Shaykh of Marcus Safinatul Noor, which is Noah's Ark Inc., a nonprofit based out of North Carolina, and I'm also the acting Shaykh and director of Islamic education, Masjid Mutakabbir, Poughkeepsie, New York, upstate New York, and West Hudson Valley of New York State.
Hayakum Allah, Shaykh. And our brother, our big brother, Haneef. Hayakallah. Go ahead, bro.
Assalamu Alaikum Rahmatullah. Haneef Davis, Durham, North Carolina. I accepted Islam in North Carolina in a town called Greenville. And there I studied with Sheikh Muhammad Aklim, Arabic Quran recitation. He was from Pakistan, from Ahlul Hadith. And I also sat with Sheikh Muhammad Hassan, who's also from Pakistan, but who was not from Ahlul Hadith, but I studied Quran with him, and he was Deobandi. So from that, I learned how to, despite being from a different aqidah, respect, other viewpoints in aqidah, even if I disagree. So I learned that from dealing with those two mashaykh. I actually studied human services technology and psychology. And I work in mental health, doing rehabilitation, counseling, and I also have another career, but due to policies, I can't mention that career on social media. But those who know me, they know what it is. Those who've talked with me privately or in the past or in the masajid like this, they know. But it's just a policy that I can't mention that particular career over social media. It's a policy of North Carolina, but I have two careers actually. So with that though, I wouldn't say I'm in the dawah field like Sheikh Yusuf and Sheikh Ukkasha. I'm more of a academic / activist. I delve into social issues, social ills, behavioral issues, history. This is my realm. And so I primarily do work from that standpoint.
MashaAllah. Okay, so Imam Yusuf.
Assalamu Alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
So I'll be brief. So I grew up in Philadelphia, North Philadelphia specifically, and it's there that I had encountered Islam, but I never really accepted. And something actually that I've never really said publicly, but I thank all of the brothers that were constantly, and I asked Allah to put it on their scales of hasanat. So many brothers back in the day were doing da'wah. And this is actually before Philadelphia became known as a Salafi center. There were so many brothers doing da'wah. It was like all throughout Philadelphia, New Jersey. It was a constant effort, and it was so intense that I don't forget. I used to associate with the church, and the pastor's daughter was like, "You have to watch those Muslims. They study hard, study the Bible, they study hard." That was the reality of a lot of brothers. The types of work that they put in, and that had an impact on me, and that actually forced me to study Christianity. And it was something that encouraged me to eventually, study to be a priest. It was a series of issues, but I just wanted to focus on that. So I left the Philadelphia area and I went to Ohio on that journey. And it was in Ohio that I ended up taking my shahada. And then in the Cleveland, Ohio community, big shout out to the brothers in Cleveland. I spent a lot of time with that community, specifically in the on the east side, the Glenville area. That's where Malcolm did his speech, the Ballad of the Bullet, or one of the speeches. Rahmatullahi alayhi. And there I was, I used to be under the mentorship of the brothers, and there was a special Imam who's dear to my heart, Imam Dawood Shabazz, and he was from the Black Nationalist movement. He came into Islam. He was one of the founders of Masjid Haq, and he passed away. And he was really big on Malcolm and Cleveland overall. You had Imam Jamil's community over there, Imam Mutawaf, who's one of the oldest imams in the country, and you had a series of others. Even Cleveland was an environment where you had one of the strongest African American Tablighi Jamaat centers. So I went through all of that, and the MSA, and then eventually, even Sheikh Abu Osama was there for some time. Sheikh Ibrahim Zaidan was there for some time. Oh, wow. And so those were some influences that were there, and I ended up leaving Cleveland and going to study that. And even Brother Luqman Williams, he passed away. He did a lot for trying to get people to study. And there, I rode with brothers that were they were tied into Malcolm, brothers that were tied into I think it's already known on the dossier, but brothers that were tied into things like RAM, Revolutionary Action Movement, and they had a direct contact with Malcolm. They were in between Philadelphia and Cleveland. So Cleveland is a very, it was a center for Islam, but it was a very strong center for Black liberation and that type of effort. And so a lot of the imams there, they combined between all of that. And that's really what impacted me along with Philly. And eventually I ended up going to Michigan to study, and I went to Egypt. And I stayed there for a number of years and continued on that journey ever since. That's about it, just trying to put in some effort, see where it goes.
And Imam Yusuf, you also stayed in Egypt, correct? Right? Did you mention that, or did I miss that?
Yeah, I lived in Egypt for 5 years. I studied mostly. I got the opportunity to study with most of the major scholars that were in Egypt known. It was not even of my own planning, but Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala had a whole different plan, and so I got to study mostly with all the heads of, not all the heads, but a lot of them were heads in Azhar, or they were involved, like at the upper level, like the state muftis and some pretty solid people. I also got to study with Sheikh Majdi Arafat, who was a student of Sheikh Mokbil. And unfortunately, his classes didn't always last too long because there was an issue of in Egypt they shut down the classes, and so I got the opportunity to get different flavors in Egypt, and I had that space to be able to study with ulama from different. And kind of just work that out through the knowledge. That's what I appreciated of Egypt. You know what I'm saying? That you can pretty much access whatever you wanted. That's why I went to Egypt. I I didn't want to go get locked into one thing because there was so much confusion when I was younger in the masajid over the different groups. I didn't want to go and be confused on that stuff. So I just worked a lot of that stuff out with the knowledge. And Egypt, they have their own scholars, and there was a pretty strong hadith movement and other areas of knowledge, because Azhar, they have their expertise that they deal with. So that was my experience, and I continued my studies after when I came back. But that's about it, and going back into Cleveland was not easy because the old heads in Cleveland, they control the masajid, so you have to be humble and pay your dues, and when they let you speak, they let you speak. You can't come back and say, I studied this and that. They don't have that protocol. You have to have respect for the elders, and when they put you on, It's a little different than other cities. But I did that, and they gave me acceptance, and I became, an imam. And one of the messages around the corner from where Malcolm did his speech. And from there, I kept moving on, and the Cleveland is divided mostly into the African American community and the Arab community, and so that was basically the base of my experiences.
All right, so today's topic was actually put forward by Imam Yusuf about gentrification, and this topic is so incredibly important, particularly for Black people and brown people, because this is a very intricate part of our history in the West, and now it's become an international type of what you call plots, or you could say like a kind of copy and paste type of ploy to steal people's land under the guise of using law and like a gentlemanly type thievery, right? Right. So, if Brother Haneef, if he can explain to the audience what gentrification is, inshallah.
Naam, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. First, we talk about gentrification. First, the term gentry, which means, upper class. That's where the term comes from, gentry. And it also comes from landed gentry. This is a term that comes out of England, the UK. And the word gentrification was coined by a British sociologist by the name of Ruth Glass. And what it is basically is you have people from a higher social economic class or high income going into low income areas, and they buy up property with the hope or the goal of investing. Now, what happens as a result of this is that the people who are making the decisions to go into these neighborhoods, for the most part, haven't communicated with the lower class people that's already thriving in the neighborhood. So what happens is you have individuals coming in from the high echelon, buying property and fixing the property up with the hope of bringing in people who are just like them to the neighborhood, which will increase the money value, and also it will make the area thrive. Now, the issue with gentrification is that what happens, many of the sociologists found out that when these people move in, it changes the character and the culture of the area. In other words, what happens, the historical implications and the historical sites in that low income neighborhood is basically not appreciated, because the people there, for the most part, who don't have enough money, they can't fix the place up. But the people who are coming in to fix it up, they're coming in with an assortment or an array of different ideas. Some come in to make the neighborhood better. Some come in to make profit. And then you have the caste and the racial component to it as well. Some come in to remove the people of color. And this has been the issue with regards to gentrification when it's being talked about in academia and amongst activists. And that is, does it have negative connotations, or does it not have negative connotations? And the reality is, it's both, but it has more negative from a certain angle. And that is, the people who come into the area do not include the people who are already there. So they will have already went to the planning department and they will have already spoken with the city councilors about the goals and the plans that they want to do in a certain area. Unfortunately, the people who are from the area, the original denizens of the area, they don't know anything. They weren't included. So what happens is when the area gets fixed up, things get demolished and rebuilt, then what? The property value goes up.
Mhm.
And
I think we lost the Shaykh for a minute.
yeah,
You're back. You're back. I think nope, you're not back. Yeah, I think we
due
lost
to
him.
due to the increase in property taxes and the increase in the property, then the people who were there originally can no longer afford to be there. So what happens is the people of the higher socioeconomic classes, they move in and they make the neighborhood theirs. While meanwhile, others are being displaced, and they are being displaced in areas where there is no investment. No one is investing in the area. So what happens is that the people who had to leave, they get pushed further from services. They can't access services that they need. Because why? Because the higher echelon went from suburbanization to gentrification, meaning they wanted to leave the suburbs because they left the cities in the past due to white flight or whatever, and they went to the suburbs. So now they want the urban areas back. So what they do is they start investing into those low income areas. Now, one of the areas where gentrification, many argue and say that it's beneficial, is because when they first embarked on the gentrification, the prices are cheap. And that's because why? That's because the area wasn't high, it didn't have any high property value anyway. So the moment you go in to clean it up, it's cheap. So what happens is it's very beneficial for those who want to buy homes to be able to buy homes because it's cheap. And it will add capital or value to the home as time goes by because the home, the value of the home is being increased, or the value of the business that you started in that neighborhood, it increases over time. Why? Because the people who are moving into the area are primarily the people who what? Control the markets, right? Normally when you fix up a home, it's to add value, right? Or when you add on another domicile to the house, right? An apartment or a guest home, it adds value to the home. The problem is that if a person did that prior to gentrification, you're fixing the home up, it doesn't matter because number one, the area that you are in is deemed low income. So no amount of fix up that you do is going to add value to that home or to that building. It'll still be cheap. As you know, some the people who may be watching this that's in real estate, location, location, location. It's the number one thing. So as a result of this, we find that the upper middle class and above are the ones who drive the market. They drive the market. And the lower income people, they don't drive the market because it's the higher income people who say this has value and this doesn't have value. So therefore, again, you know, you're fixing up the home prior to gentrification, it's not going to benefit you. Now, if there are plans to gentrify it, then of course, now you can add value to the home, because why? It's deemed desirable by those who want to come. And this is the main issue. Who deems it desirable? Who deems it expensive? Who deems it inexpensive? Right? It's more about who has the right to say. And this is the main issue. This is the issue. If the lower income people are boxed out, they're not given a voice, then we're going to have what we're going to have. Yep. And that is the higher echelon coming in and saying, hey, we want to do this. We want to destroy this. Okay, these people got to move. And because why? Because it's about profit for them. It's not about the people. It's about profit. So if that component isn't dealt with, then for the most part, gentrification can be negative. You know, so when we talk about gentrification, before we go into gentrification, we got to talk about what led to gentrification, right? Because gentrification is nothing but a form of urban revitalization. Mm-hmm. The thing that makes gentrification possible is urban renewal. And urban renewal, African Americans, we know it so well, because that also displaced our people, as well as the Hispanic community, like the Mexicans in California, displaced a lot of them, displaced a lot of African Americans in many cities, in Illinois, New York. We can go on and on and on. Here in North Carolina, we can go on and on and on. Philadelphia, we can go on. Wherein urban renewal, it is basically policies set up by state government to basically clean up, fix, or repair blighted areas, slum areas, and to make them more modern. Mm-hmm. This is what they say urban renewal is. And the issue about urban renewal, Haneef, is that urban renewal throughout the whole of the United States, it lasted from 1949. That's when it started. Mm-hmm. After World War II, 1949. And it makes a lot of sense that it started in 1949. Why? Because you had the issue prior to that of the New Deal, the FDR, right? And the Fair Deal. And this is when the New Deal brought in things such as the GI Bill, right? These are some of the benefits from the New Deal. However, African Americans were locked out of that for the most part. Even those individuals who fought in World War II, they were locked out. So the areas that they were in were slums. So what we find happening is the local government, as well as state government, they pretty much made policies wherein they could come in, demolish a whole neighborhood, build a freeway there for the benefit of the city. Or they can go in. The
1956 Highway Act, the 1956
right.
That's exactly what it was.
Exactly.
It was they intentionally put highways and raised entire Black communities.
Right.
You know what I mean? Calling it urban renewal, right? And they used the term that these communities were blighted. They were blighted. And what they meant by blighted, because the President Eisenhower at the time, right, that was code for Black communities. So this is a real thing.
Right.
The highways that we're driving on, how many Black communities are we driving over? You know, homes and whatnot, right? Because of urban renewal.
Right.
Go ahead, Shaykh.
Indeed. No. Right. Yeah. Not a problem. And so with urban renewal, it also took parts, if not halves, of whole neighborhoods for the benefit of what? The city. Not for the benefit of the people who lived in those areas. They did it primarily for the benefit of the city. So you have from 1949 until 1974 is when urban renewal took place. Yeah. And so when you study the various literatures dealing with gentrification, you'll find that urban renewal set the stage for gentrification. Now, what makes them different? What makes them different is urban renewal policies.
Yes, it's gentlemanly.
Yeah,
it's gentlemanly.
Right. State and local, right? Gentrification, on the other hand, private investors or philanthropists making the decision to go into a low-income neighborhood and fix it up, and they pull in other investors, right? This is the paradigm that they use. So this issue is an issue that we should be used to.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's happened throughout our history.
And it continues to happen.
It continues to happen.
That whole situation with Breonna Taylor was specifically because of gentrification.
Right.
She was murdered because of gentrification.
Right.
Because a part of the system of gentrification is that, as Dr. Claude Anderson, he mentioned, there is an intent behind urban neglect. What urban neglect is, benign neglect, not urban. Benign neglect. What benign neglect is essentially taxation without representation. So you have all these poor Black and brown areas who are paying taxes, and they're paying into the system, and the system takes that tax money and puts it into white neighborhoods. Right. And at the same time, we have a long history of our enemies flooding our neighborhoods with drugs and police. They flood it with the drugs, and as Malcolm X once said, how do you get more cops and more crime? You know what I mean? Right. It only shows that the cops are in cahoots with the criminals. But this is intentionally done in order to try the property values down so that the gentrifiers could come in and usurp the land because it's cheap. Nobody wants to live there, right? So with the situation with Breonna Taylor, they were intentionally trying to criminalize her in order to force her out of the house. But what ended up happening, she ended up getting murdered. Because again, gentrification is gentlemanly, right? It's not like what was going on in the times of Reconstruction, where they would just intentionally raise your entire Black community to the ground because you were successful and you had businesses and whatnot. It's like saying, oh well, you know, because of all the crime in your neighborhood, this crime that was structured by design by the government, mind you, right? Because of this crime in your neighborhood, we're gonna do urban renewal. You understand? As you were mentioning, right? So I'll allow Imam Yusuf to chime in this because I know the Shaykh is driving. So go ahead, please. Yusuf Rios.
Yeah, I wanted to take another angle, and I was kind of hoping that you all were going to take that historical, institutional angle, because you know a lot of times, you know, Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. A lot of times we are only going by what we see in the moment, and so understanding processes becomes more complicated because in order to prove that something is going on, you have to be able to identify how you know what's going on, or else it becomes like what has happened in recent times. You know, people say, oh, well, that's, you know, conspiracy. They write it off. Even though conspiracies may not necessarily be without basis. And so a lot of times these things, they're going on and there's no conspiracy to it, but what it is that we don't understand the processes. And so you were talking about the processes of how this stuff is operationalized. That's why it's important for us to be aware of what's going on with city planners, who's on these boards, what's going on with the city planning office, and how it is that corporations are making moves, because we're in a different phase of capitalism. We're in a phase of capitalism under an administration that has been in office for a long time, which they believe in privatization. So a lot of the things that before maybe were legit, through the institution of government, like Haneef was mentioning, that there were certain policies in place about urban renewal, and that comes, it starts tying into redlining and everything else that comes along. Now is a different ballgame because private investors do it, so it's not that easy to understand as it was before. But we can track it. We can track it by looking at what's going on in other cities, looking at what's going on in other parts of the world, because capitalism is not creative in a lot of ways. They don't have new playbooks, so that what they do in one part, they do in another part, so it's easy to match. Mm-hmm. Now, that's from the side of we need to be aware of what's going on. Why? Because of the impact that it has on our people, right? The impact that it has on our people, and we have to be people that are aware of what's going on. A lot of this conversation specifically within the general black community, it has been going on for a while. It's within the Muslim community, that we haven't seen the conversation. And is a conversation which needs to be had among us, because some of us, when we start talking about, and let me just group blacks and Latinos together, because the statistics of difference are not too different. So if you say black, pretty much the brown is right there, maybe about 10% off or whatever. Usually that's how it works. So within the black community, when we start talking about violence, a lot of people, they start to not understand how to deal with the question of violence. And so they start blaming the community, and they go along with that rhetoric of basically almost like inherent dysfunctionality. Inherent dysfunctionality, they almost make it like failure and being a detriment to society is synonymous with being black. And so that becomes a serious problem. I'll give you an example. When you try to understand the Chicago reality, we know that Chicago, we saw a spike in violence even before COVID. And we know that we saw that there was like a lot of gang activity, a lot of killing. Now, what people don't talk about is that when gentrification was taking place, and like Haneef was saying, like when it was talking about urban planning ideas coming from both sides, they decided to knock down the projects. And when they knocked down the projects, which was mostly where black folk were at, they created an environment where those people were internally displaced in an environment which was already stratified along other lines, like lines of gang territory, income, color, everything that comes along. And so then what we began to see as a consequence of those processes is people in our community, they started to kill each other at another level for other reasons but the violence was not there. So then our analysis becomes thrown off because we don't understand what are the processes, and we start blaming the people, because at face value, it looks like, yeah, these people, that type of talk. They're doing X, Y, Z. That's how they are. But we're not looking at the conditions, which have created that. The other issue is this. Now that's like the general black community, right? The other issue is this, like now when you start bringing this back, like let's bring this into like the New York area. Masjid al-Taqwa, we know historically that the Muslims, specifically of African American descent, they went in an area, because we know the history of New York, how New York was divested for a long time, unlike what we see now with all the, the gentrification and everything that has taken place. And so Masjid Taqwa is in a situation that they were at one point in time a community, not just a masjid, they were a community. That area was cleaned up, and even the system knew it, by the Muslims themselves, black Muslims,
Exactly.
black Sunni Muslims. Now they're in a situation where they're surrounded by inflation of property value that is so high that it puts Taqwa in a situation where they have to rely on other Muslims, other Muslims from other communities to support and secure themselves. That doesn't mean that Taqwa is not doing a good job, but we have to be very cautious in our analysis to understand what is even happening to the black community, because the black community, Muslim community, is in these environments. And so the existence of the black community is under threat. I'll give you another example now. In Cleveland, Ohio, you have Masjid Bilal. This is the first masjid to be built in Cleveland, Ohio, from the ground up as a masjid by the black community. No other community prior to that had built a masjid from the ground up. Later on they did. But they went to the city, changed zoning laws so that they can make the masjid face the Qibla. Because I don't know if people don't know this, but the zoning, usually the way that zoning and building codes are, is not an automatic that the building's going to face the Qibla. So they went and they pushed and they changed for legislation. Muhammad Ali rahmatullahi alayhi had helped them somewhat build that masjid. They were from the Water Clean community. And so now that masjid is in an area where people like Rockefeller and all of them, Carnegie, they were dropping money. At one time it was Millionaires Row. It was in the aid of the I forget they called it the golden something. There's a term for it. It was basically when the oil barons were making money. So it's in that type of area. So now the masjid starts getting surrounded by all this development. The masjid gets surrounded by all of this development, and the masjid population is graying. So the young generation is no longer there. So if no one comes to make sure that they secure, if there's no generational continuity, then that means that building goes out specifically of the Muslim community and the general Muslim community. And that's the threat, the existential threat that's happening even to our institutions. Now, I want to make one more example. When gentrification takes place, communities are not usually moving together. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Depends, if she's going down south, I may go down south with her. But what about if you don't have a family that moves that way? Or what about if you don't have a community that you necessarily follow? Like in New York used to be a Puerto Rican central. And even now they're having problems with being have redistricted. So now areas that have representation no longer have representation, and that's going on in a lot of cities because the redistricting allows the gentrification process to take place at a more rapid rate without people really knowing what's going on behind the scenes, and the councilmen and the ward leaders and all this type of stuff. A lot of times, if they're not active and pro people, they're in with the business interests. So what happens is, as this change takes place, like in the case of a lot of the Puerto Ricans in New York, they decided to go to Florida. So that community, it replaced itself, but it is still scattered. But it went back a concentration into one area. So what happens when you become an internal refugee is that if you don't have any movement or any group that you're following, you're on your own. So you have to go figure out where you're going to get an apartment in maybe a far off suburbs, and like was mentioned, you far from resources because the busing system is not, you're racism. Maybe you have issues with your credit. So now they have all these things, which we call, basically, qualifications, which are barriers for people being able to move those areas areas or other areas, so they become internal refugees, and they're trying to figure out how you survive, and they're moving into different spaces on their own without any support systems. In the past, people lived around, they lived in the neighborhood, they lived around their jobs. That allowed people to unionize. It allowed people to organize.
That's right.
And when the factories were outsourced, one of the things that they started to do was move work locations away from the workers, so they can't sustain a protest, they can't sustain an organization, and it's the same thing on the political level. When you are scattered, it becomes very difficult for them to organize on any issue, whether it's and police brutality or you don't like what's going on in the school board. You're basically on your own. So what's happening to our people is that they're being so displaced. Many are ending up in shelters. Many are ending up disenfranchised. They're ending up going down south in a time period where there's, a rise in racism. And so everything begins to change. Those are some of the points that I wanted to mention, and I especially wanted to highlight that issue that, what happens to the future. And this is a conversation that's ongoing, but what happens to the future of the African American community when these areas where the masajid are in are being transformed, and we don't have a connection to the masjid, neither a strong economic base, and there's no youth continuity. Does that mean a potential threat to the actual existence of the African American Muslims as a community? And then what happens to their integration into other ethnic communities? Do they find a space where they completely integrate? And we see that New York had that problem, where the converts just stopped going to the masjid except for Juma, whereas it was a center at one time of, indigenous conversion. It became a place of people just, becoming more and more detached, from the message. So I just wanted to throw that out there a little bit to see what you all had to say about those issues.
Well, Ikhwan, I just wanted to mention between the four of us, right, just so that for the audience to understand that between the four of us, there's probably 120 years of experience. All of us, I'm pretty sure all of us been Muslim 30 years or more, correct? I'm pretty sure that's for all of us, right? Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
Right. So if you do the math, you're talking about 120 years of experience between the four of us, right? So we're talking about issues that we've seen before our very eyes happening, and we've seen how Islam kind of morphed and changed into something that it wasn't, and Islam was something that was actually doing things to improve not just the Muslim experience, but the communal experience.
Revolution.
It was as you were mentioning before, it was the Muslims that were cleaning up the neighborhoods. And then, in my humble opinion, I don't know how you guys feel, but in my humble opinion, right, as usual, as per the plots of the enemy, right, we were infiltrated, and particularly Dawah to Salafiyya took a complete 180 turn because it was actually changing people's lives. You understand? So now we become Muslim and we completely forgot where we come from, right? And we traded where we come from for dogma. And dogma, that dogmatic type of mind control mindset, is what caused us to ignore the issues that are right in front of our face. And if you look at gentrification, it is actually a plot to steal your land. So as Dr. Claude Anderson said, is that Black folk, they don't live in communities, they live in neighborhoods. Well, if you have a community, right, when my child is getting out of line, my neighbor can discipline my child. I won't have no problem with it. You can't do that in a Black community. You understand? Because you're living as neighbors. And because of this disunited, dysfunctional, type of living, it causes nefarious forces to come in and take all of our resources while we don't even know. You understand? It's Pharaoh's land grab. Like legit, it's Pharaoh's land grab. You understand? And a lot of that falls directly on us because we have not, as Imam Yusuf said, we have not allowed this type of continual community type living from passing down knowledge from the elders to the youth. right? And how we should live in a community. But now everybody's out for themselves. They're out for capitalism, which causes a bigger problem. You understand? So Shaykh Ukkasha, he actually has a story, right, related directly to gentrification. We'll allow Shaykh Ukkasha to hop on this, inshallah.
I openly admit that Sheikh Yusuf, both him and Haneef and yourself, you may definitely have more insight, more knowledge, more awareness about this issue. So, I'm like an apprentice, as I said, in this issue under you guys. But, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Laysa khabrun kal ma'ayin. What you hear is not like what you see. And that's not to displace or devalue narration, because you have he said, she said, that is not accurate and blameworthy. And you have he said, she said, that's accurate and is praiseworthy. But when you see something, which includes you experience it, no one can tell you that that's not true. And so one of the main things, as some of the information overlaps between what Ustad Haneef mentioned, Sheikh Yusuf, and yourself, Bilal. One of the things that I discovered in doing my research, they said that on the ground, gentrification may look like it may look like when you talk about the issue of neighborhoods. They said it may look like a term they usually call real estate speculation, and that is when a person buys something with the risk that they may lose something, but they're looking for a gain. They sit on the ground and may look like that. And why am I starting off with that? Because one of the things I've seen is that the issue of redlining is part of that process. Like, when Sheikh Yusuf was talking about the issue of the community and, how these people come in, and like Haneef mentioned the GI Bill. Yeah, that's like people who were in World War II. They were supposed to come home and be able to get like, a loan and get some housing in a good community. But they have these different, as you say, policies or different formulas. Even on the job, they have a formula by where they can talk about who has the most active job time from amongst females, or if it's males with different, cultural background. So they have all of this stuff figured out. And when you look at that, the question about the future, it's a question mark. And it's like Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz and Dr. Martin Luther King and those people who died. It's like, when you try to deal with this thing head on, you have to feel like the bigger you get in, the more you're in, are you really jeopardizing or putting your life, I should say, on the line, because you're up against these powers to be. Even when you look back at the Prophet ﷺ, the Muslims in Mecca, that whole experience about some of them going from Mecca and Arabia to Africa, and then some of them remaining there until the Prophet eventually left Mecca and went to Al-Medina, and some of them coming back to Mecca after they left and then making it through Al-Medina. This is the same mentality we're talking about. And, I remember when we were little and just researching and getting ready for this talk, it dawned on me, we went through this when I was a kid. One of the stories I told Haneef, I said that, as I mentioned, I'm the middle of 5. So my latter 2 siblings, they have the same father. Of course, he's deceased. And then me and the other 2 siblings, were the first 2, we have the same father. So my stepfather, meaning my brother and sister's father, he got killed in like 1980. He died. And he was buried in a graveyard, in a place that we will say it's urban, African American territory. And I remember the street, like it's a bridge called Jefferson Street, and that street is between a street called the Cleve and Compton is at the bottom. So you have like a bridge, and underneath that bridge was the graveyard. They removed the graveyard in order to put rail or like a rail link that would go from downtown all the way out to the airport. And I remember my mother, she was saying that we don't even know where Johnny's grave is at. They just moved it, didn't tell the people nothing. SubhanAllah. And I remember when we were young, we lived on a street called McPherson. And we lived in it was called like a 6-family flat, like had 2 sides. So you had a 1, 2, 3 on the right, and 1, 2, 3 on the left. So we have 6 families, and they were some apartments, but they were in a nice area. A lot of white people, a lot of people that had jobs and walking the dogs. It wasn't like a place where people normally would say this is low income or welfare. It was nice, and around the corner was the one of the biggest colleges in the United States for medicine, Washington University, University, near Forest Park, And so the first thing I remember, the white people started buying the houses and fixing them up, moving in. And we just thought like, oh, those are nice white people. And then eventually the apartment we lived in, they made us move. Some people brought it and turned to condominiums. And so they took us and put us in an apartment that I later found out was a condemned building. But they had to move us. So we're in this building, a big apartment building that holds maybe like 5 families. And it's the only building on the little side street. You come out and you just have like a big lot in front of you where they just tore down stuff. And then on the right and left of your lot is nothing. You're the only building on the street. So I remember we went down to the mayor's office. My mom, and she had a friend named Miss Melinda. She was Caucasian, and she had mixed children. And my mom, she knew the committee man and those people, like, dealing with elections and stuff like that. And so I remember we went and we were in the mayor's office, and my mom said, we're not leaving. It was like about 6 families. And, of course, you got the children. So we were packed in the mayor's office. She said, I'm not leaving. We're not going anywhere until you get me and my babies and us a damn place to stay. So they said, well, we're closing at 5 o'clock. She said, I don't give a damn. So we stayed. It was like 6, 7 at night. So finally they brought McDonald's for us. We ate. The next day we had keys to a townhouse in a place called the Cleve Town. And that place was with lawyers and doctors, and they had the oil lamps, when you come outside, little bird bath things, and sand boxes. When the blacks start coming, the doctors, the lawyers, all of them, they moved out. That place became like a place for people who used to live in the north side projects and the south side projects, and eventually that place was ran down to the point somebody came and brought all of that complex and turned into part of the college across the street, which was a 4-year state college. So we actually went through the gentrification process without me even knowing it until now. As a kid, man, subhanAllah. And one of the things when I listened to, and then I'll end, I listened to some programs, and it was one program where there was a lady, she was the daughter of a lady who was Puerto Rican Latino, and she said that they had to move when they went through this issue themselves. It sounded like they were in New York somewhere. So she said we were looking for a place and how difficult it was, and she said there was this one place had a big for rent sign. She said we were outside the place. So my mom is talking to the guy on the phone in front of the place. And he says, yeah, it's for rent. Of course, the sign is big. It says for rent. So he said, okay, but I have to ask you some questions before we proceed. She said, okay. So the man, the real estate guy, he says, "What's your nationality?" She said, "I'm Latino, Puerto Rican." She said, and after that, the man, he said, "Okay, and what about your spouse?" So she paused for a minute, and she said, "Yeah, my spouse, the person who's with me, he's black. I have mixed children, that are African American, Puerto Rican." The daughter said at that point, the man said, "The place is not for rent." Are you serious? SubhanAllah, really, just like that, And I remember another story. The guy he was telling, he lived in Brooklyn. He was saying how it changed like Haneef said, it changed the culture because you have certain things in your community that you need, and when those people come in, it looks like they want to buy real estate and flip it and make the community nice. Really, the federal government already told those urban housing programs the only way you can get this money from the bank, don't rent to these people because they put down these people are risk factor. So as soon as you see their risk factor collapse, you're not going to rent to them. And that's when they instituted redlining, because these are the areas that these people can't get in. Why? Because they're risk factor. So imagine they see my name. I'm a risk factor because of my nationality, my ethnic background. It doesn't make a difference how much money I have. The code is don't rent to them. Why? Because they won't be able to do all of the stuff we're talking about if they break those codes, and those people can't get that money, which the federal government and the banking system is part of this as well. So the guy was talking about Brooklyn, and he said, all of a sudden I just knew we had to move. He said, so we moved across the street, and we moved from a house that was my mom's. My dad and mom paid for, but because people came in and raised the taxes and the values, we had to sell it and move. He said, so we moved across the street to a place where we became squatters. He said, we're in that place as squatters. He said, and eventually they came and brought that too. He said, and basically, we were homeless, He said, so this whole thing, he said, sometimes you can't even go back and visit your own neighborhood because all of the people are gone. So this for us, in conclusion, like, I don't know, people are going to have to analyze, like Shaykh Yusuf was saying, what do we do? But, it's putting the squeeze on us as Muslims, African American, Latinos, the minorities, because not only are our neighborhoods being taken, or if you want to say communities, contrary to what Dr. Anderson said, it's also our religious life. Like they said, when the people are displaced like this, it affects them mentally, spiritually, even the children, their friends, the things they know. I mean, it promotes, deep depression. You wonder why people on drugs and alcohol, sometimes it's not they want to be. They're in a situation where, it's too much. It's too much, So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us at least these conversations or the beginning, because, just talking about it made me do research, and we have to try to come up with something that can be a viable solution, and we ask Allah for his help. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Ironically, the solution is actually, like, I don't mean to sound cliche, but the solution is actually the Quran and the Sunnah.
Okay. The Quran and the Sunnah the Shaykh going to jump on you about that, Shaykh Yusuf. I'm going to give him the mic now, because this whole thing about slogans, he talked about this. By the way, we said some of your best lives, Shaykh, in the car. You were in Chicago, you know what I'm saying? So don't feel bad. You want to say, I mean, that's a statement we could all say, but really, like, how do we take that and put that on the plate where you could see, oh, that's the meat, let's cut it and eat.
Right.
Go ahead, Shaykh Yusuf.
I mean, that's something that, subhanAllah, there's two things, when I look at what's going on in Jersey City, because I had, a few years back, I had the opportunity to participate in some interfaith thing. And I realized, like, some religious communities, followers of Musa, they would come in from New York into Jersey City, and the way that their religious leadership operated was that they would use interface to basically put pressure on the mayor, so that the mayor puts pressure on the governor, so that the state governor, so that they're able to get more police, so they're able to do whatever they need to do, so that they can continue whatever community building aspirations that they have. So people on the ground knows that what happened. Jersey City, some people say, is the tail of the city. So one of the things that was said, and this is why I'm bringing this up.
Say that again, Shaykh. You said some people said that's
people need to realize that I'm talking in those circles. People need to realize that many people have been made automatic millionaires because of their homes. Because their home went up in value to like $1 million based on all of these dynamics. They may not necessarily have $1 million in the bank. It's the value of their home. So in this country, your worth is based on your home. So that's why a lot of us, because we're not home owners, and there's a lot of different reasons why we're not home owners, but because we're not home owners, we don't really exercise full citizenship, and at the same time, we can't protect ourselves from, what's going on, like, because we can't make money moves in the way that everybody else is making them. Now, when we start talking about the Quran and the Sunnah, the issue that comes back is that when we look at the general principles, like the objectives of the Sharia, the maqasid of the Sharia, the objectives of the Sharia is not one detailed evidence, not one ayah of the Quran or one hadith or two hadith. That means if it reached the level of being an objective of the Sharia, it means that there's so many underlying evidences that nobody can come in and give a contrary opinion that this is an objective of the Sharia, like the concept of preservation and elevation of the deen, preservation of life and elevation of life, because it's not only preservation, it's also development. And the same thing, that intellect, preservation and development of intellect, preservation and development of family, preservation and development of wealth, and human dignity and wealth. The order of the maqasid is a debated thing. Some people, that's why when some people, they say, well, Tawheed, they say Tawheed first. And we understand what they mean by that, but say, for instance, in the case where your community is being disrupted, your masjid is about to go out the door, so are you going to aim to preserve your wealth at that point, the masjid, to preserve the deen, or are you just going to be talking about, Tawheed? You know what I'm saying? In the sense that it doesn't have any institutionalization. So we have to look at the fact that not only is our dignity being hit, and we have an obligation to preserve our dignity, but our wealth, and also our family, and also our deen, because, we can live deen as individuals, but, if we don't think about, we have to start learning lessons from other communities. So you have like some Jewish communities, they went through the same thing, but they moved as a jama'ah. So their religious leadership starts trekking out a direction. So they may go to the Midwest, and they may go somewhere in Amish country, start buying up farmland, and then they start creating business for themselves, but they're leaving as a jama'ah. And I think that, and Haneef and I, we had talked about that some years back now, I think it's been, that maybe it's time that we start making a call to internal types of hijrah. And it can only be loosely organized because we don't have all the resources, but we need to start thinking about what areas in the country can we be moving to. And of course, everybody's not going to move, but at least it's an issue where we're ahead of the game before it gets even deeper than what it is. And we start talking about how it is that we can repatriate other areas, around the masjid, not just someone, all of a sudden you find yourself with cheap rent, but you're in a situation where you're stuck. We need to be thinking strategically in that regard and make it a priority of our deen, living our deen in this environment. not challenging that, because if we apply the objectives of the Sharia, we could definitely see that this is a serious priority. You know, I give you an example of that, and I mentioned it before in an indirect way, but Imam Abdul Malik, who was part of Masjid Taqwa and so on and so forth, one time he came on, he said, you know, we basically got kicked out of New York, to that effect. He said, in New York, you can't do anything if you're not starting with $1 million. And so he was saying we need to go to other cities and so on and so forth. And so that's leadership. You know what I'm saying? That's leadership, but we need something more tangible. You know, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the situation got too hard for the Muslims in Mecca, when the circumstances were becoming too difficult economically, you know, in terms of their security, in terms of freedom, everything in that regard, psychologically, he organized, you know, he allowed the part of the community to organize itself and go to Africa. And so they went to Habasha. You understand what I'm saying? But they didn't go as individuals. They went as a jama'ah, and they had to be prepared of how to deal with that new environment. Even when the Prophet ﷺ was recommissioning Mu'adh to go back to Yemen to his people, he was teaching them how you need to make the move. The same thing when the Sahaba will be sent out to Iraq by Umar or whatever. They will be appointed with different tasks on how they're going to navigate. And ultimately, the community in the Prophet's time, at the end of the day, they all had to pull up. And they went to Medina, you know what I'm saying, and they restructured. So we could say that, you know, we find parallels in that regard. But the question is, you know, are we going to be able to get to a point where we can function? Because we know in some areas of the South, some of those masajid have been burnt out, you know, more than once. And so we have to really think about what it is that we're talking about doing when it comes to addressing this situation. But some of these areas, and I used to say before to myself, you know, that Islamically maybe we shouldn't even be in some of these areas, right now, unless we're going to transform the area, like the earlier Muslims in this community did. But some of these areas are killing zones. So what we're doing is we're putting our youth, we're putting them at risk when we send them to school, when they're walking in the neighborhood, and we're living in these areas which they're in between the gentrification process and where things were in the past. And so the idea is, how is it that we can really start to elevate the esteem of our community? You know, we need to apply enough of the deen where our community has enough is under threat. And if it doesn't wake up, you know, we won't have a community. You know what I'm saying? We won't have a community. So that's, I mean, a reiteration of what was being said, but the psychological work that needs to be done in order to build has to be, you know, something that's a priority, because we won't be able to get to that point of doing anything. We won't, you know, look at, you know, and some people hate when I say this, but look at brothers that came from the nation of Islam, how many of them were in the streets, how many of them were in jail, and then they turn around with certain props in their mind. And we know we don't follow their aqidah when it comes to who Allah is and so on and so forth. But we have to admit, and I raised this question before, and I'll say very specific because some people are sensitive, you know, blacks and Latinos, we do too much self-hate stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so we do too much self-hate, which is an internalization of oppression, and we don't understand that process of what's happening to us and what has been happening. And that's why Dr. Amos, he wrote his piece, so that we break out. The work has been done. We just need to know how to apply it. When we talk about violence and we talk about the actions that we do, many times we're acting in the interest of oppression of ourselves and those who oppress us. And so that we won't be able to make collective moves if we don't have a concept of collectivity. And I want to say this one thing and tone it down. Malcolm realized early in the game that if we were going to continue the liberation process, you have to be able to operate within the Muslim community, and you have to be able to operate outside of the Muslim community in terms of being able to come up with a solution to address our people's condition. We lost that concept, and we traded that in. You know, we lost it. We said it was not correct. But to be honest with you, we need allies in the general community of our people, they're already making moves. Like look at Cooperation Jackson and Jackson, Mississippi. That came out of the New Africa, movement, the Republic of New Africa, and they went down and they got a mayor. Imam Jamil Alameen was trying to do that. You know what I'm saying? When he was in the ATL, he was trying to rebuild the community on the economic level, on the social level, and they stayed and they were doing what was being done in New York. I don't know how many brothers actually know that they were battling it out in the streets with people to clean up those neighborhoods. And some brothers died in the process in recent times. This is not what time. And so the situation that we need to have is leadership psychology. We need to have really talk about Wallah wal Bara, and it's not to values. That's not what Islam is called. Not to of our people in Iman or even our people in ethnicity, and we're doing wrong. It's calling us to align with those who are doing good. You understand what I'm saying? And it may be the case that some of those people may not be from our creed, because unfortunately, brothers that we have overlaps with in Aqidah, they don't have the same interest when it comes to caring and loving for our people. And in many instances, they work against the community itself, the dawah and, the well-being of the community. And that happens to be from people within our own ethnic group and people outside of our ethnic group. Because all that dawah that was done all these years in the hood and gave Islam standing, that all got torn up when you have these different types of stores that come in, which they create an environment that, it's an environment which contributes to the deterioration of, and it changes the image of Islam. But we have to realize too, it's not enough to just say all these Arabs coming in, because those people are refugees. That doesn't mean they get an automatic excuse, but they're coming from their own destruction. So they're in the survival mindset themselves. And I watched it out. I watched it. They battle each other. All kind of crazy stuff happens in those communities as well. So if we're going to take a leadership role, we need to understand that the psychological piece, the reconstruction of the mind of our community, the ummah overall, and specifically, our brothers and sisters that we share ethnicity with and tribe with, the mind is not correct. You know what I'm saying? The mind is not correct. And we have too much self-hate for our aunties and our cousins and our neighbors that are not Muslim. And many times they're more advocate for us than brothers in our same circle of Iman.
That's right.
And we have too much self-hate for ourselves. And that was the thing that was attacked from the 70s and even the 80s. It was the self-esteem and the self-love that was being injected back in the community after it was deteriorated. And that was the secret of MLK and Malcolm and all of them. It was the love of the community. There was an actual community. The black community is an actual community. And that's a problem that a lot of times we don't see that. In a lot of these areas, if you really look at where blacks live, the homes are big. So you have cousins, you have aunties. There's no such thing as a nuclear family in many places in the hood. And so that's what's being destroyed, because once you move those people out, they have to go to a 1-2-bedroom apartment. They can't afford to have everybody living with them. And it brings massive tension in the family. So those are some things that are extremely important. We have to look at it as an obligation to really address these issues, and we have to recreate the community, and we have to address this psychology, which is actually a psychology which is not allowing us to come together and make a real impact, because we can't come together. We're hating on each other at levels that are problematic. If not just totally being violent toward each other. And in some cases that is the case. Look at the case what happened in Philly. Where brothers are showing up with guns to a funeral and this and that. Those cases are a lot. And in many cities, Muslims are killing Muslims. And that's a reality. It's not just African Americans as people think. When you go to Minnesota, you have these young Somali youth in gangs. You go to some places, and when I was in Chicago, you have Pakistanis that are part of the Latin Kings and other gangs. And so you start having these issues where the destruction is hitting at multiple levels. I know that I went beyond a little bit, but I think we need to develop that position, more deep and firm.
Shaykh Haneef.
No, yeah. Salaam Alaikum.
Oh, before you continue, Shaykh, I just want to put the link in the description. If anybody comes with questions, please hit the link, right? And I'll get you on, inshallah. So go ahead, Shaykh Haneef.
Yeah, for the most part, with what Sheikh Yusuf was saying with regards to changing our psychology, for me and Sheikh Ukkasha, Sheikh Yusuf, Rios, they know me. That's my area. I call it cognitive reformation, changing the way you think, or replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts, and then trying to act out those thoughts. That's on an individual level. On an individual level, it's one of the best things that we could do. Whether you're talking about getting closer to Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, increasing worship, all of these things work for the benefit of the individual. But with that, it should also push people to work better with others outside of themselves. Because the deen, it teaches us how to work individually, but it also teaches us how to work communally. And we have to be able to pull these things together. For example, like the issue of the job, right? The neighbor, right? It's a serious question that many of us need to ask ourselves, living in this country or Canada or whatever. How close are we to our neighbors? Do we strive to give the neighbors their right? Do we let our neighbors know, hey, do you need anything?
Yeah,
I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Simple applications like this. It's like Rasulullah alayhi salam was sent to perfect what? Husnul khuluq, right? Good character. Why? Because good character not only is beneficial for the individual, but it's beneficial for the overall mujtama, the overall society. So if we practice these basic things, while at the same time recognizing our faults, the issue of muhasabah. I can't stress this enough. I talk about this all the time, the issue of muhasabah, taking an account of yourself. Everything that Sheikh Yusuf Rios just mentioned, these are things that call upon us to indulge in muhasabah, reflecting. Do I have self-hatred? Do I know what post-traumatic slave syndrome is? Do I have the psychology of self-defeat? Do I have racial battle fatigue or black fatigue? Do I even know anything about these things? Am I even reading the works? If I don't read, would I even go on YouTube and type these words in to try to ascertain what they are? So that I can do what? So that I can be better mentally. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So the Quran, it always encourages us to think, to reflect, to dabbur. You're right. So these are things that we have to get involved in. One of the things that I do in one of my jobs, I talk with individuals. And I ask them, in particular, African Americans and Latinos, I ask them, when you see another African American male or another Hispanic male, what goes on in your mind? Because I'm going to tell you what I see outwardly when you look at others. They don't want to answer. Well, what you see? What do you see? I'm going to tell you what I see. Why are you frowning up at the mere presence of this individual? Why are you frowning up? In other words, are you asking yourself, What behaviors am I exhibiting? And does those behavior come from my oppression, meaning the trauma that came about through the oppression and that was passed down? And also, am I acting based off what? My conditioning and my programming. And that's another area that we have to be cognizant of. And that is the issue of us being conditioned and brainwashed in certain ways. If we don't tackle these issues, we could talk about gentrification and how we could put our money together. And if we don't work on these issues, then there's nothing else to talk about. Because you're not making the personal, individual sacrifices to be better and to get along with people who look like you. And then you're not trying to bring other people in so that you can practice these things together. This is a huge issue. And I hear this all the time from non-Blacks, non-Hispanics who say those guys, they don't work together. Because I'm going to tell you something, amongst the African Americans, we have the propensity to think that the Latino community, they like that. Like they don't have violence or like they get along. Nah, man, they beefing. And Yusuf, he can tell you better than I can. Just I'm around both groups. You know, it's not what you think. Oh man, the Latinos, they can. No, you have certain populations from amongst them that do that. Same with African Americans. You have certain groups of African Americans that know how to come together. Unfortunately, it's the higher echelon. It's the higher echelon, right? Meaning the upper middle class and higher. Those guys know how to come together. So what I'm saying is that for anybody who really wants to work on themselves and work with others to look like them, then put it out there. Like I'm saying right now, the issue of putting your money together and building. Okay, my first thing is, okay, do you even know how to work with people that look like you? What type of work have you put in? And if you haven't put in any work, okay, then tell me your ID. This is what needs to be done, because we can talk, right? And you know, Islam Adeen is about what? Action.
Yes.
Not just statement. It's about
action. First,
indeed.
you believe, and then you do the action.
And then you do the actions. Indeed.
There's no talking in between that.
Right. Right. So the point I'm getting at in saying this, and I'm being general, but the point I'm getting at in saying this is that, to me, through listening to Shaykh Yusuf Rios, this is the first line of defense. After putting our trust in Allah, we have to learn how to work with each other as well as work with non-Muslims as well. We have to learn how to come together despite differences, because we're talking about survival. And you being a minority, right? And the Muslims are a minority in this country. You don't have the luxury to wage all-out wars against each other.
Yep.
These are pedo wars and the likes. You don't have that luxury, because your Aqidah wars is still not dealing with the issue of gentrification.
Exactly.
It's not dealing with the issue of racism. It's not dealing with the issue of segregation, which is still, segregation is worse now than it was. I mean, really. Whether you're talking about de facto segregation or de jure segregation, they both still exist. But we'll make general stuff. Oh, Islam is against racism. But then we quiet when the Muslims practice racism. Or when the Muslims say, look, as a people, African Americans as a people, we need to do more for the benefit of our people Then you got another group of Muslims saying, oh, that's nationalism. Wherein, when their people are in survival mode, no one's saying that to them. So these are little issues that we have to work on. African Americans, Latinos. Sheikh Yusuf Rios brought up a point about when you look at the numbers dealing with African American, Latinos right there, right? Matter of fact, we can always go on the line. Native American, African American, Latino, right? Always go on the line. What's sad is these three groups, right? These three groups have a history of mixing, having children together, but simultaneously they'll do what? They'll fight against each other. Over what? Over the scraps. When all they have to do is come together, change the way you think. This is where I'm at with all of what we're talking about. People need to change their psychology. They need to work on changing their psychology and then put it into action. If that doesn't take place, you can forget about the economic aspect. You can forget about building, all of that stuff. You can forget about that. You have to, the eye is clear. Allah does not change the condition of a people. They run for sin, right? Until they change what is in themselves. So you mean to tell me we forgot that eye? You have to work on yourself. This is why the Sahaba, they always did muhasabah. They took account of their sins, how they treated people. You understand? So accountability. These basic issues that which really are deep issues, they basic because we read them. But I think from my observation, we take them for granted. And so therefore, we don't practice them the way that we should. So that's pretty much where I'm at, with regards to that. I could say more, but I'm a cool out because I get going. Y'all know how to do it.
Yeah, you're always, man. That's our favorite, boy. Boy. And listen, I almost wanted to cut it to you and the joke about and say all of that you said is because you ain't on the manhaj, you ain't on the manhaj. That's why we ain't changing our thinking because you ain't on the manhaj. You know what I'm saying? I mean, but a reality is what you said. It's like, I don't know, Aki, if some of this could be changed. You're talking about a situation, and Sheikh Yusuf likes to use the term orientation. Others say doctrination. I mean, it is what it is, Aki. And that, as they say, at the end of the day and at the end of the night, like-minded people, that have, a close understanding to one another in these affairs, then that's, where we could probably begin. But if we really think like, 100%. Just talking to people and people are going to say, oh, okay, no, Aki, because people really think like we crazy. And they not crazy, Aki. People really think we astray and they on it, Aki. And once you get somebody to feel like that mentally, you're not changing that, Aki. They got to die off. A new generation of people got to come who don't know nothing about that, and hopefully they won't retain it in order to have like a fair chance when we're talking about changing that. But Aki, this is a deep situation, and I tell you, like, Haneef, you're there in Durham. You have some children that may be like in the 5th and 6th grade. What does the 5th and 6th grade know about economics? What does the 5th and 6th grade know about life skills? He sure know nothing about, worshiping Allah, Tawheed, and Sunnah. Don't you know some of those same children that have been indoctrinated tell the teacher, someone who's old enough to be his mother, father, you in bid'ah. My father said I can't take from you. So we're dealing with this type of mentality with our people when you talk about African Americans and that compartment that claim they on Salafi or the Dawah. So, it's like we could say be concerned, but really we're not even concerned with them. If they concerned, let them come forward. Let the innocent people that's not hurt by that and they're repairable, let us work with them. But we think we're going to save those type of people, their mentality. We already, like you said, we can start the conversation on that note too. It's not happening.
Right, Shaykh. I agree. Like I said before, this is me.
Yeah.
You serious about coming together? If you friends with me on Facebook, get with me. I got a lot of ideas. But at the same time, I'm about putting in that work. I don't do a lot of talking unless the talking is going to be of some benefit, where it can be impactful. You understand what I'm saying? So this is where I'm at with it. Because like for example, I give you an example. This is something I used to talk with a lot of the guys in gangs, deal with them a lot. And there was an incident where you had two individuals. They were, I'm gonna just use street terminology, they were beefing, right? And so I intervened. And I'm like, so what is this? Is some gang stuff going on here? Say, yeah, man, you wouldn't understand. So I separated them. So I let them cool off. So about 30 minutes later, I had them talk with me. So I said, listen, let me ask you something. You in this gang? Yeah. I said, you got factions in this gang? Yeah. I know the faction. Y'all be beefing. You guys, you be beefing. You in this gang, and y'all got this faction, this faction, this faction. And you guys can't get along. I said, so you guys lose all the way around, which makes our people lose all the way around. Because you guys, different gangs, within gangs, they can't get along. Not only can you not get along with the other gang member, but you can't get along with other subgroups in your gang. So I said, so how do you guys make this work? Because they couldn't answer. There's no answer for that. So I proposed to them. I said, listen, since you guys are cliquish like this, right? How come you guys don't form a corporation? Put your money together. In the area you live in, put your money together to fix that area up. You guys in the area you from, put your money together to fix that up. Oh, we never looked at it like that. I said, but it's your neighborhood. You repping the neighborhood. You not trying to own the area that you rep. I'm from this area. This is ours, but you don't own it. This is that mentality. This is that mentality that is holding a lot of us back. Now we can come in and say, well, listen, Haneef, and I'm a big proponent of this. Haneef, they didn't create that for themselves. Agreed. No doubt about it. I'm 100% with you on that. But at the same time, they are responsible. They're responsible for how they can fix that situation. Mm-hmm. You're responsible for yourself. And until people get to that point where they can say, hey, I have to fix this within me. Listen, man, we have some ugly characteristics that's holding our people back. Yeah. Until they think like that, then it's not going to be like it was when I was coming up in the 70s. It was a lot different in the 70s. Mm-hmm. Man, you couldn't do nothing. You couldn't do nothing. In the neighborhood, you couldn't do nothing in the neighborhood. Because why? Because Miss Sally over there, she'll put hands on you, just like your moms and your pops will put hands on you. You understand what I'm saying? This is what's been lost because we have adopted this Eurocentric individualism.
Yep.
Individualism does not work with Native Americans, African Americans, or Latinos. With communal people. Like Sheikh Yusuf Rios mentioned earlier, you know, they used to, you know, living in big houses. The cousins lived there. This is how we are. This works for us. These are points that Dr. Rita Walker points out in her book. Name of the book escapes me. The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health. Rethinking, reflecting, you know, as far as Muslims, tafakkur, well, muhasabah. This is where it starts. Question yourself. Am I doing what I'm supposed to? Am I being neighborly? Then the Muslims you deal with, what are we doing collectively? Is where it starts at. You know, and if it's not starting there, then gentrification gonna do what it's continued to do.
And another tool of the enemy. Just another weapon in the pocket of the enemy against us. And mind you, Allah says in the Quran, you see them as united, but really their hearts are divided. Allah is telling us about the enemy. So the fact that we haven't figured it out yet, it's not something that they're doing right. It's something that we are doing wrong. And we have to take accountability for our own actions. Go ahead.
It's 10:15. We've been talking a long time. I don't know. You said 10 minutes and we're going to do question and answers. So what do you think? Like we should wrap it up, and then the next time we come back, we should come back with some things we can institutionalize, like some real resolutions. You know what I'm saying? Because even when you talk about the neighbors, this is like textbook for us, you know, because you got somebody next door who, you know, just waiting to blow your head off. You know what I'm saying? So we got to have workshops on how to, you know, even introduce that idea to ourselves and the neighbors of, you know, speaking and dialoguing if we haven't been doing that before. You know, we talk about the issue of self-hate, and I mean that's a hard seed to deal with, you know. So we gotta have, when you talk about, for those terms, muhasibah, tadabbar, the average Muslim just trying to make it to stay sane, you know. Well, like even if he's praying or she's praying or not, they just trying to make it from day to day. What do they know about accountability? You know, they think they already took accountability just by what they doing. We have no clue, you know what I'm saying? So we need to develop some workshops where we can show how to take these steps, you know, because if we're going to tell the people they're accountable and they have no idea what we're talking about, that's a losing battle. So I think we could make some type of the monthly, like you said, Bilal, where we have programs like this, and we could, in our group before that, come up with the topic, maybe some workshops, you know. Haneef take this, I take that, Sheikh Ukkasha take that. Now,
Sheikh Ukkasha, Haneef had promised us to launch his whole program. Haneef, who said Haneef, he was supposed to be working on a program.
I'm still
curriculum and everything.
I'm still working on
it. Long term. He gonna go out.
We need part one to come on.
That's long term. He gonna go out the back door and take it easy, Sheikh Yusuf. He's looking at the blinds already.
Maybe that book. Sorry about that. Sorry to cut you off. I couldn't hear it really well. But Haneef, maybe that book, The Guide to Black Mental Health, maybe doing. I know you started already, though. You started already, but that book maybe a good start.
Yeah. Huh? Yeah, it's a very important. It's very important. It's very important, and it deals with a lot of the issues that affect, you know, African Americans, their psyche, and a lot of, I would say, inaccuracies that we hold on to that plays a role in keeping us stagnant, you know. So yeah, it's a fantastic book. So inshallah, we can work on doing something with that.
Okay, so Sheikh Haneef, I'll give
you. Just so people just I wanted to add on to that point really fast. I was talking to a group of Daisies that are in mental health, and one sister, she's doing her PhD here on the East. They work together.
He's gonna have to repeat all of that.
They're relying on whatever is written in the black community and other communities, and they're trying to, apply that. So the reason for that plug-in is to say that in reality, and I've always said that when the African American community takes the forefront, it really has a massive impact on everybody else.
Yeah.
And that they're telling you, we're looking at it. So I think, Haneef, that could be major, man. That could be a major inroads to something.
Yeah, inshallah, it's most definitely a source that I utilize in my work and what I'm working on. So inshallah, we could try to do some things with that, and it would also help us to be able to deal with the issue that we were originally discussing, that is this gentrification, because that gentrification, man, is having an impact. And the videos I sent you, brothers, man, they even gentrifying Puerto Rico. Wait, no, Sheikh Yusuf sent that one. But I sent the one I sent the one about Hawaii. Man, it's but gentrification is not something new. It's been done all over the world.
It's a system. It's a system, man. They got that
right.
System. It is a system. I've seen it with my own eyes in Malaysia, how the Malays are getting pushed out by the Chinese out of their own land, because the Chinese are buying up the land, driving up the prices, and the Malays in Malaysia will lie. They told me this, so I hope YouTube doesn't strike me for this. This is what I'm just quoting what they said. More than one. Okay, more than one. I'm taking a taxi in Malaysia, right? And the taxi drivers are telling me that the Chinese are the Jews of Asia. They're telling me that because they come in, they buy up the land, they drive up the prices. The Malays, the actual locals, can't live there anymore, and then they have Europeans and Chinese coming in and owning up the property, all of Malaysia. You understand?
Yeah. So you mean that as a characteristic for the audience, and not that they're like we say the Somalians, they're excuse me, but they say they're the niggas of the African, the niggas of the Africans. Yeah, so we understand they're imitating the Jews, those Chinese.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Somalis imitating.
But they learn from the Europeans.
They
learn from the Europeans.
Yeah, and it's the same type of plot. The darker skinned people get pushed out to bring in the lighter skinned people. You understand?
Yeah.
So Sheikh Haneef and Sheikh Ukkasha and Imam Yusuf, I'll give you each 2 minutes to close this out, and then we'll wrap it up, inshallah. Go ahead. Sheikh Haneef, go ahead. You start.
But yeah, in closing, I will say that the goal of gentrification is multi-pronged. And one of the issues is the reality of what happens when it comes into play. And it maintains segregation, whether de facto or de jure. De jure segregation is what is done by the government, and de facto is what is done by an individual. It maintains that. It also maintains classism, where a higher socioeconomic group maintains control over the lower economic groups. These are realities that we can't lose sight of. And finally, is to maintain a form of capitalism. I call it the Friedman Doctrine, wherein profits matter more than people. This was a war that was carried out by the libertarians in the early 70s. And they got everything they wanted. Everything is going their way right now. So this is the times that we're living in. This libertarian Friedman Doctrine driven capitalism. This is what we're seeing. And this is the results. Gentrification, urban renewal is the results of that. So these are areas that we really need to study, to become abreast, and then come up with strategies on how we can help our people, Muslim and non-Muslim, with regards to these issues. And I'll close on that.
Shaykh Ukkasha.
Well, I mean, if you want, I can sing the song, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. I mean, that would, close it all down, you know what I mean? I mean, the reality when we talk about this whole thing, they have this thing so dissected, and it's deceptive, and it's made to be like that for a lot of reasons. Because you go back to those amendments in the Constitution, how they said 3/5 of a human being, then they changed it later on to 3/5 of others. Now they made it class. You see what I'm saying? So this is an ongoing fight, and I mean, I don't know if we could walk away with the trophy at the end, but we can't lay down, and we have to remember that people are dependent upon us. For all those Tawheed pushers out there, this is a part of the Tawheed, to know yourself as well as knowing your Lord, and to give a service to your Lord, then the people. So, on that note, I mean, I'm behind and support anything that can be a tool in that way, and definitely I'm part of this whole system that needs to have this support for himself, his family, and his future. So, as they say, may Allah help us and bless you, bless us all, and we say God bless America. And Canada.
Imam Yusuf.
Yeah, I just want to just in case people take the wrong idea, because I know how some people are out here. But when you were talking about the Chinese or the Jews of Asia, so they can't twist it to say that it was something racist. I think that they're an organized minority that has clear goals. I don't want people to get the wrong impression in that regard. But overall, we have to be for ourselves and our interest as a collective. You know what I'm saying? I think that's important. That doesn't mean that we aren't for other people universally, but I think that is important, knowing what we need. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as we don't dehumanize others, and as long as that we don't violate the deen, or that we, are prejudiced towards others unnecessarily. And I think a lot of people, they get scared when people start talking about working in the community and like being for your tribe. They begin to think, now this is getting into like Asabiyya and Asabiyatul Jahiliyyah, but that's not the case. I think, we have to be clear on that.
Yeah, so I was mentioning before, and it's not a cliche, even though I said it, that the actual solution for gentrification, which again is one of the many weapons of the enemy that they use against black and brown people internationally, right, is actually the Quran and the Sunnah. When you look at the 5 pillars of Islam, the 4th pillar of Islam is zakat. Okay, or sorry, the 3rd pillar of Islam is zakat. Right, zakat is group economics. It's group economics. It's legislative group economics in the Quran and the Sunnah, right? We are not practicing that. So let's just be real. Let's be honest here. What we are practicing is donating money to the masajid. So the masajid become money pits for darker skinned people. And that has been the playbook for the last 25 years ago. It wasn't like that in the 90s. In the 90s, we were out there in the streets making dawah, calling people to Islam, cleaning up the hoods. That's how it was. And then
giving our money.
Exactly. All right. You know what I mean? So then the shit focused into this ultra dogmatic, divisive doctrine, which caused us to fight each other instead of fighting the enemy. You understand? And that has been the playbook for the last couple of decades, right? So now the 4 of us who are all Salafi, alhamdulillah, right? Lots of experience behind us, alhamdulillah. We are talking not from something that we're like some sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like a type of imaginative idea. No, we're speaking from experience here, right? And on top of that, with you know, Shaykh Ukkasha and Imam Yusuf, they have like lots of time studying. Imam Haneef has studied, you know what I mean? Me, I'm just a dude.
I'm just a dude.
I'm just a dude. You know
At
what I'm
least
saying?
y'all know your agenda. Alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah.
But the point is, right, if you look at the Arabs at the time of the Prophet sallam, right, those people were killing their babies, all right? They were incredibly misogynist society. Women didn't have any rights at all, you know what I'm saying? And they were illiterate, okay? And the Prophet sallam came as an illiterate prophet and made a whole bunch of illiterate, backwards, downtrodden people into the pillars of society. You understand? We are an illiterate people. We are financially illiterate. We are economically illiterate, politically illiterate, educationally illiterate. And the only time we actually read is to get involved in drama on Facebook or on Twitter or whatnot. You understand?
Allah.
And unless we make this, as Shaykh Haneef was saying, unless we take accountability for our time and our actions, then, you know, nothing's going to change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, as you know, as elders, like, well, you guys are the elders. I'm like,
Man, stop that, man. I'm young, man. You're never gonna have nothing to show when you call me an elder, I think. And then my wife here, she gonna say, "See, I told you." I'm young. Get yourself together. You know what I mean? Take account of yourself right now.
Yeah, but there's a difference between being an elder and being older. You understand? If you're doing the same thing that you were doing 20 years ago, and you're calling to the same nonsense you were 20 years ago, and ain't nothing changed, you're just older. You understand? But an elder is telling the younger people what to do so that we as a community can succeed. And that's why we cover this topic. Is a very, very important topic. We have, if you look at the Jewish community, they actually, not only they live in communities, but if you go into any Jewish community, it's like you're in a different country. Ain't nobody coming in there, and you couldn't offer them all the money in the world for them to leave their homes and their properties. There's not enough money in the world for that. But us, because we're very short-sighted, we don't think like that. You understand? And this needs to change, especially when you have the Quran and the Sunnah and the Fahm and the Salaf. Especially that the responsibility is way more on you. You understand? So I will leave it at that. Hayakumullah, thanks for all the people who joined us today. Thank you, Shaykh Ukkasha. Thank you, Imam Yusuf, and thank you, Shaykh Haneef. Hayakumullah. I am very, very honored and blessed to have you on the channel, and hopefully, inshallah, we can make this a regular thing. Right, I'm hoping that. Right, we got a lot of good feedback, alhamdulillah. Right, and I do believe that these type of forums, not only are they needed, but they're necessary, because we're like, right now we're moving like rats in the wheel. We're not going anywhere, right? So you know what I mean? Yeah. We need to take the next.
Let's add this, Sheikh Bilal, before you go. Sheikh Islam Taymiyyah, he wrote a book about Siyasat Islamiyya, Islamic politics. For all those people that think we bugging, then, you know, they say don't believe the hype. We on point. This is the da'wah. This is the aqidah. This is the manhaj. This is amal al-salih.
May Allah reward the brothers who donated, Brother Kevin and Brother Naeem. And may Allah reward everybody who shared, who commented, who participated, who liked the video. And please continue liking and subscribing and sharing. I'd like to thank our guests. May Allah reward them and bless them and their families tremendously. Subhanaka wa hamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.